Where'd you get this?
On the shelf.
If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. A rumbling sound, then 3 sharp knocks.
Babadook, duk, duk.
That's when you'll know he's around. You'll see him if you look.
Welcome everyone back to another episode of Pop Rant Radio presents Spooktacular. Nope.
Spooktober?
Spooktober. Ooh.
The Spooktacular Spooktober.
Oh, yes. So it's the last episode of Spooktober for this year.
Maybe.
Maybe.
There'll be a phantom episode.
There are some who say he is only a myth. Soon they will discover the Phantom is real.
So we watched the Babadook tonight.
Yeah, which I heard a lot of positive things about when it came out.
Yeah, it got a lot of really glowing reviews overall.
Which we talked about that I'm pretty skeptical of that. I feel like every year there's the new horror film that everyone claims it brings back horror to the standards of, yesteryear or whatever the hell they say.
Right.
Like, it happened with It Follows, then it happens with this, and then this year it even happened with the movie Don't Breathe. And I saw It Follows, and I saw Don't Breathe, and they were okay. They weren't groundbreaking.
Yeah.
So I was a little skeptical when people were saying, oh, the Babadook is amazing. It's so great. It's up there with, like, Alien and Shining as one of the best horror films of all time. And I was like,
Yeah, because you and I were talking right before the movie about how it seems like in film criticism and reviews, it's like, well, it's good for a horror movie.
Right.
Like, there's always that writer on there that...
There's a comma.
Yeah, and... horror is really interesting. We haven't really talked about horror as a genre this October. It's interesting because there's so many kind of inbuilt tropes, and unless the film is something like the original Alien, where it is horror, but it's got a lot of other things going on.
Right.
Or like how we talked in an earlier episode about The Strangers, and even though that movie kind of shoots itself in the foot, the beginning of that movie subverts a lot of the expectations that you have out of a genre film for horror. And luckily, this movie kind of does the same thing for a long time.
Yeah. It doesn't have jump scares. It doesn't have, weird moments where, because one of the biggest problems for me right now with horror films is soundtrack and whether or not a sound that we're hearing is a sound that the characters are hearing.
Right.
Or if it's a soundtrack, like random percussion hits could sound like footsteps to a person, but to us it could just be someone hit the drum once,
So yeah, there's actually a term. It's diegesis. It's basically, can the characters within the film hear it, or is it something for us, the film watcher, we're experiencing? So something, noise or sound or music that is diegetic is something like in the movie, there's a song playing on the record player. That's an in-universe sound. Whereas something like a film score, like the Star Wars, music playing over an action sequence or something like that, that's extra diegetic, so that's outside of the universe of the film, and we, the audience, are hearing it.
Are you saying that the Empire doesn't have like a marching band that's just off to the side whenever Palpatine shows up to the Death Star?
That would be really good.
It just pans over. There's like futuristic instruments, like a future sousaphone.
It's the Cantina Band just playing, or Max Rebo,
right.
I think in the expanded universe, Max Rebo and his band actually got off the sail barge before it blew up.
Yeah.
I think that's canon, or it would be if that was still a thing.
Did the singers, though, from the special edition. So I kind of hope they don't.
Yeah, I love the idea that Max Rebo Band is just off on the side, playing the Imperial March every time Darth Vader walks into the room.
And it's half the stormtroopers are there standing in formation, the other half are off to the side yeah!
A couple of them are dancing to it.
Fist bumping to it.
So diegesis, whether it's a sound is diegetic or non-diegetic, or extra diegetic rather, basically whether the characters in the movie are experiencing those sounds or whether it's the sound that the audience is experiencing only. You're right. Film these days, horror films especially, with the classic jump scare, where a character is scared because something pops up and there's usually a single piano chord or thud.
Like an emphasis note or something.
A single note, and the volume is way louder than anything else in the film.
And it usually has a very long build. It's kind of like when the bass drops.
Yeah.
which
It's like when the bass drops. Exactly.
Well, and then Hollywood now has gotten even more of an asshole mood where now they even do fake out jump scares where you're expecting something to happen and then it's a cat, or then it's like the friend who you shouldn't hang out with anymore because he likes to come up to you in haunted houses and tap you on the shoulder.
Or it's a statue of Jesus that falls out of the closet.
Yep. Which is great.
So this movie does a really good job of kind of playing with diegesis, playing with diegetic and extra diegetic sound.
Right.
And you and I, while we were watching it, we were commenting on how the sound design and specifically the sound editing is really, really excellent.
Yes.
Like it definitely helps convey the mood and the tone of everything that's going on. And there was even a certain point in the movie where you and I kind of looked at each other and we were like, all right, this is good, but they're almost to the point of overusing it.
Right.
And they really back off for like another half hour of the movie and they don't utilize that technique again.
Yeah, and I didn't really notice that until we sat down here where I was like, yeah, you know what? After we talked about that, they didn't do it again.
Yes.
Because it's a sound technique they use a lot in Gravity is where I remember it most from, where it's the soundtrack builds and it's getting louder and louder, and then it just like out of nowhere just cuts.
Right.
And it's silent. And then there's something else happening.
Right, and we're left with only the diegetic, the in-universe sound, but with no music.
It's used in this to demonstrate like a 90-degree turn in story.
Yeah.
Like something's happening, the music drops off, and the story takes a 90-degree turn.
Yeah.
Someone's doing something that is very irrational or very like,
and
impromptu.
Specifically, in general, the mood of the mother character, as she is our main character in this movie, it's generally a turn for her when she goes from one extreme emotion to a sense of calm or serenity or to another extreme emotion.
Right.
Yeah, so the Babadook, basically, it's a pretty simple story. So it's about a mother.
It's a simple story, though. There might be more under the hood that we don't know.
Ooh. It's about a mother who... And the movie takes place in Australia?
Yep. It's an Australian-made movie.
Okay.
It's the director's debut, actually.
That's really, really impressive, actually.
Yeah, it's very strong for a debut.
Mm-hmm. So it's a mother. She's probably in her, like, maybe late 30s, if I had to guess. And she has a 7-year-old son named Samuel.
6-year-old.
Oh, he's
Until
about to...
the end.
He's about to turn 7.
Right.
Spoilers.
6 going on 7.
He has a birthday.
Right. Whoa, careful.
And she's single. She's a single mother because the father died on the way to the hospital. The father was driving her to the hospital while she was pregnant with Samuel.
Right.
And we don't learn until the very, very end, but we can kind of surmise the beginning. There was some sort of accident and he was killed on the way to the hospital. This movie is more about the cinematography and the emotions on display through the characters than it is events, so to speak.
Right.
Like it's kind of it's a classic horror movie that takes its time.
Yes.
Like we really get to see the built-up relationship between the mother and her son. And what's the mother's name? Amelia. Amelia is the mother's name. We get to see the relationship between Amelia and Samuel, and it's very, very strained.
Right.
Like at the very beginning, it's established that Amelia is not getting any sleep. Samuel is constantly coming into her room late at night, waking her up, talking about how he's having bad dreams, or he's just a very eccentric child.
Right. He thinks he's seeing monsters, essentially.
And
they're under his bed or in his closet, which I liked that too. They had a repetitious scene that kept happening where he would come in the room, they'd go in his room, they'd check under the bed, they'd check in the closet, he'd go with her back in her room.
Yeah, and they repeat that a couple times to where it conveys to us, the viewer, like this is a ongoing, like normal thing that probably happens every night. Yeah. It really does a good job of kind of building that tension up. From the very, very beginning, like one of the earliest shots when they're both in the bed together and Samuel falls asleep and Amelia like scoots all the way to the opposite side of the bed.
Right.
Like just through visual language, the director is conveying to us there's a strained relationship here.
There's some distance between the two of them. And the thing I do like though is they also throughout the film show that even though there is distance between the two of them, that's still her son and she's still very protective and she's still very loving in scenes like he gets in trouble at school and like she gets very angry at, I assume, a headmaster?
Principal or whatever.
Something. He kept on referring to Samuel as the boy. We're trying to help the boy. The boy's not paying attention and she just gets really mad. She's like, stop calling him the boy. His name is Samuel. He's a human being.
Right. Yeah,
so there's
he has a name.
There's a lot of defense. And I mean, I guess you could spin that as, is it about him or is it about her where like his representation affects her position? They kind of play with that as it goes on in the movie with different people and different scenes.
Definitely. And we established that Amelia works at a nursing home.
Right.
And we get the sense that she doesn't get a lot of fulfillment at her job. She interacts with all these elderly people. They're not all there.
Right.
She's very much alone. And she has a coworker named Robbie that she talks to briefly.
Who just leaves the movie at one point.
Yeah. He's kind of a jokester, but we get the sense, again, it's conveyed very effectively through dialogue and through tone without overtly coming out and saying it. Robbie kind of has a thing for Amelia.
Right.
Like, he probably has a crush on her. Later on in the movie, he offers to cover her shift because he knows that
something's bugging her.
Yeah, Samuel is sick and she wants to go home, and she's very grateful to him. So, like, again, we get the idea that he has feelings for her, but the movie doesn't have to outright come out and tell us that, which is always a welcome thing.
Right. There's no moment where, like, he grabs her by the arm. He's like, you know, I've been looking at you.
Other important characters in the movie, there's a next door neighbor named Mrs. Roach, who has Parkinson's.
And has a very unfortunate last name.
And then we have Amelia's sister, whose name I don't remember, and I don't think it really matters. Claire. It was Claire.
There's the Claire.
Amelia's sister, Claire, who has a young daughter herself, who is named Ruby, who is the same age as Samuel, roughly.
And they were born near the same time?
Yeah, not on the same day, but roughly around the same time.
They might not be the same age, but they talk about how they kept sharing birthday parties.
Yeah, so it's established that every year Ruby and Samuel celebrate their birthdays together at a joint party, but not on Samuel's actual birthday.
Right.
Because, again, that reminds Amelia of her now late husband. And so, again, a lot of like little details that are kind of inserted, especially in the beginning of the movie, again, just through dialogue and through tone, that really kind of paint a picture and build us this world that Amelia is struggling with and living in.
Right.
And we really get a sense of her depression and her emotional turmoil, which is super, super central to the movie.
Right. And the big thing about it is a lot of horror movies, especially nowadays, like to do that opening prologue where whatever the monster is or whatever the killer is gets someone and then the movie starts.
Yeah.
In this, one, the monster doesn't show up until about over halfway through the film. And two, the monster aesthetic isn't introduced until I would say like 25, 30 minutes in.
Because so the introduction of the monster is right before he goes to bed. Samuel wants his mom to read him a book.
Right.
And she's like, okay, you choose the book tonight. And he grabs a book off the shelf. He hands it to her. And the title of the book is Mr. Babadook. And she opens it up and starts reading it. It's like a pop-up book.
Yeah.
And at first it's like...
It's kind of innocent.
Yeah,
it's weird. It's very Tim Burton-y innocent, but
it starts out innocent. It's like there's the Mr. Babadook, and he's like this. He
wants to be your friend.
This like black figure with a top hat and like a smile on his face. Yeah, he wants to be your friend. He wants you to let him in. When he knocks on the door 3 times, the knock sounds like Babadook, Dook. Dook.
Right. It's 3 light knocks and then it's 3 like
really loud
definitive knocks.
Yeah. So again, it really kind of builds that idea. And then as Amelia starts turning through the book, it's super creepy really quickly.
Right.
Like the imagery is really messed up, and it's like the Babadook is like a giant shadow, like looming over the bed of the child. The child is really obviously scared in the little pop-up book.
The child's gone in the rest of the book, so it's kind of got negative implications.
And the language is like, basically at the end of the book, it's like, you'll wish that you were dead.
Right, which, nope,
and
get this book out of here.
And this was a really cool detail, is like, as Amelia is reading the book, like, she is noticing that it's getting really creepy.
Right.
And she stops reading it out loud and is, like, flipping the pages, and she's like, holy shit. Like,
well, and he's clearly getting bothered by it, too. And then she eventually just, like, closes it and just grabs something else.
But Samuel wants to know, he's like, what happens, Mom? What happens? And she's not reading it. And then, like, hard cut to her reading, like, The 3 Little Pigs or some other book.
And he's, like, wailing.
Yeah, he's, like, crying because he wants to know what happened in the other book. And she's just like, nope, we're not doing that book. Let me read you this other book. And, like, this movie has a lot of, I think, really effective hard cuts.
Yes.
Like, throughout it, there's, like, 4 or 5 that I can recall. And they're all really good at conveying, like, just the slightest bit of humor or conveying, like, kind of a story point. Again, without having to overhand and, like, spell out everything that's going on.
Right. It's a good way to show a change of direction.
Yeah, this movie is very well versed in the visual language of filmmaking, which is something that we definitely don't see very much of nowadays.
Especially in horror films.
Yeah.
Horror films usually do a lot of flat angles. They don't do any setup. They don't do any characterization.
And it's a lot of cliches. And for the most part, this movie does a really good job of avoiding cliches entirely.
Yeah.
Or if it utilizes a cliche, it subverts your expectation of how that cliche is going to play out.
Right. There's a lot of times where you expect a jump scare or you expect to see the Babadook, but you don't, which builds your tension. And then when you do finally start to see it in places, it makes it more impactful.
I don't think they once used the Babadook as a jump scare in the entire movie.
No, I don't think he jump scares at all. So things start to escalate with
Yes.
it. She gets a little more paranoid about it. But
She hides the book.
Right.
After she reads the book
she
to
puts
Samuel,
it on top of a...
like a dresser or a cabinet or something like
Something like
way
that.
out of Samuel's reach.
Right, but Samuel is starting to like obsess over it because he's obsessed over monsters in the past, but he keeps talking about it and she keeps trying to tell him, stop it, it doesn't exist. So much so that it actually estranges her from her sister to the point where like he goes to their house and he keeps telling his cousin about this Mr. Babadook, and it's freaking her out and it's freaking the aunt out, and there's like, we need to stop. Like,
Yeah.
Get out of here.
And multiple characters in the movie kind of express to Amelia, like, there's something wrong with your son.
Right.
Like, your son needs help. And that tension just keeps building. There's lots of times where Samuel is crying or he's screaming. And again, Amelia is clearly, like, overwhelmed with the situation. She doesn't know what to do. So things are escalating. And then Amelia finds the Mr. Babadook book in Samuel's room again.
Right.
And this is kind of the main crux of the movie is playing on the idea that we don't know if all of this is just in Amelia's head.
Right.
Or if things are really happening.
Which they make it worse because about halfway through the film, they introduce that they're going to put them both on medication.
Yes.
To calm Sam down and allow him to sleep. And same thing with Amelia, like help her sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Which we both talked about while we were watching it that, well, now it's going to show up. Like now we're going to see it.
Right.
But it's not going to be, it's going to be even less real now.
Yeah,
because...
it's always questionable because
Right.
there's all of these variables and all these elements in play. And another thing the movie does a really good job of is conveying Amelia's lack of sleep. Like there's 2 or 3 times where she like goes to bed and then there's like kind of like a fast forward thing with the film and it's immediately daytime,
Right.
showing us the audience that like she goes to sleep and then it's that feeling where like you immediately wake up and you feel like you've been asleep for 15 seconds and
Right.
like that's her, like she hasn't been able
She's
to
not
sleep.
getting quality sleep.
Yeah, and again through the visual language of filmmaking, like we're getting that message without it again explicitly being spelled out for us.
Well, and there's a lot of parallels between this and The Shining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much like with the little kid Danny, I think.
Yeah, and with Shelley Duvall's character, like
Yeah.
she starts to descend into madness just like Amelia does. And very much like Shelley Duvall, they progressively make Amelia look more and more distraught.
Yeah.
Like her makeup's, like she stops doing her makeup about halfway through.
Her hair's all
starts
messed
to look
up.
crazy. Like her hands get really dirty. She never washes. Like her clothes, she looks like she's wearing the same clothes every day. Like,
Yeah. And like
they do a really good job with that.
Yep, she leaves work early that one time, and then like later on that day, Robbie stops by and is like, "Hey, I just wanted to check on you, make sure you're okay, see how Samuel is doing. You feeling better, buddy? I thought you were sick." And he's like, "I'm not sick." And she's like, "Right, well you're not sick, you're just misbehaving." And Samuel gets kicked out of school.
Yep.
And so she's looking for another school, but in the meantime he's home, and Robbie's like, "Oh, okay, great." And then there's like a hard cut. Robbie's not there anymore. And it's kind of this slight humor where Robbie came over. He had flowers for Amelia and he's like,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm a good guy." And then he just like bolts
He's
as
gone.
soon as, yeah.
we were joking that it was like, all right, Robbie, time to get out. It's a bad idea, dude. Back out of here.
Just
And he does.
hard cut. He's no longer in the house.
Well, he's no longer in the movie.
Yeah.
He's gone.
He just disappears out of the movie at this point. So Samuel starts going down into the basement.
Right.
And at the very beginning of the movie, it's established that the basement door is always locked. And we figure out that in the basement, there is a lot of memorabilia from Samuel's father, Amelia's
Right.
late husband. There's like pictures of him.
His
and
clothes are
his
set up.
clothing. Yeah. And Samuel, again, has a very active imagination. And he's really into magic.
Yep.
He's like really into doing magic
Magic
tricks.
the Gathering.
Magic the Gathering, the card game. And he is like practicing his magic show in the basement, but he's also talking about how he's going to fight off the Babadook and
Right.
and protect his mother from the Babadook. So she comes down there and yells at him and like, "You're not supposed to be down here, you're not supposed to be messing with your father's things." And he's very mad. He's like, "He was my father too, like you don't own him, I should be able to see his things." Again, just building the tension, building the anxiety, building up the emotion. So when she finds the book again, she's like, "Okay, this is no good." She tears the book up
Right.
and then throws away in the trash.
Like rips every page to pieces.
Yes. So we get a little more things going on at her work. She basically gets fired. Like they call her and tell her like, "Don't bother coming anymore. We're going to
Right.
give away all your shifts." Samuel's not in school. Like social workers who come by to kind of investigate things.
Right. They go to the party for the cousin.
Yeah.
And he like she says a whole bunch of horrible stuff to him in like
she
her
says
treehouse.
really terrible things.
She's like, your dad probably wanted to die, so he couldn't be with you. And it's like, Jesus, all right.
Kids are mean.
So he shoves her out the treehouse. She like lands on her face and breaks her nose in 2 places, as we find out later on. And like, so that's it. They're like, they can't see their aunt anymore.
Yeah, Aunt Clara is like, get your kid out of here. Like, I don't want to see you anymore. It's just building into the fact that Amelia is getting just strained emotionally more so than anything else. And then there's a knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. And Amelia goes to open it and there's nothing. She closes the door and she walks away, and then we get a knock, knock, knock.
Like a thought. Like, this is like the back end of a fist, like slamming on the door.
So she goes to open the door again, and there's nothing there.
The Babadook's there.
But when she looks down, the book is back. On the front porch.
And the cover is like, looks like it's bent a little bit, and like as she starts to flip through some of the first pages, you can see it's been taped back together.
Yeah, it's all like reconstructed.
But the cool, like, this is probably one of the coolest parts of the whole movie.
This was awesome, yeah.
As she gets a couple pages in, you start to realize that the text is different. And now the book is 100% personalized for them. And like, as she's flipping through it, it says like, the more you deny me, the stronger I get. And like, she flips, it shows him like attacking her now. And then it's like, won't you let me in? Which is like a constant theme with it. And then it shows that he's going to make her kill the dog.
The dog Max, who we haven't mentioned yet.
Right, the little pup, which is a sweet little like Shih Tzu or something. And then she's going to kill the kid.
Right, the book is showing her like strangling the dog and strangling the
Samuel. And then like, it finally like finishes off with her like slicing her throat, and it's complete with a nice little red piece of paper that just comes out of her neck. Super sweet attention to detail. It's really creepy. It like rhymes. Like, whoever wrote this did like a really good job.
The artwork
making
is
it feel like a real book.
Yeah, the artwork is awesome. Like, it's super, super well done. She immediately burns the book.
Right, because that's one of the 90-degree cuts. That's actually, I think, the last time they do that.
For a while,
she's like reading it, and it's like it's getting louder and louder and louder, and then it just stops. It shows her throw it on like the grill, and like she just lights it up.
Yeah, she just burns it up, and Samuel like comes out and is like looking at her, and she's like, "Yep, this was happening."
So she then decides that someone's stalking me. She kind of like comes to that conclusion.
Yeah, she calls her sister Claire, and Claire's like, "Look, if you're that worried about it, just go to the police."
Right, and here we get another like really good subtle horror.
Yeah.
So she goes to the police station, and clearly the officer is kind of like half believing her, half not.
Yeah,
like
there's the officer at the desk, and there's 2 other officers in the background. And like the very first thing she says is, "I think someone's stalking me. They sent me a children's book." And like the guy in the background's like, oh. And the officer at the desk looks at him, and he's like, "Oh," and he quiets down.
Right. But of course, since she doesn't have the book, no proof, as she's like kind of explaining more, and as he's kind of like trying to talk to her about like what their protocol is, she looks off to the back behind the officer, and on the coat rack is a oddly shaped like cape and like a top hat, which is of course like the iconic what Babadook looks like.
Right.
And so she freaks out. She's like, "Oh, never mind. I'm just gonna get out of here," and she just skedaddles.
Yeah. And then there's a couple of subtle things here and there. Like there's a shot where she's looking out the window as she's doing dishes into the neighbor's house. The neighbor's watching TV.
Which they set this up quite a bit, that she's not a creeper.
Yeah.
Like her neighbor, like she looks after her essentially.
Yeah.
So they do this several times throughout the movie.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful setup.
And then there's one part where she's looking out, and then in like the background of that room in the shadows, like we get the Babadook's like face in the outline of his hat and everything, and he's just smiling, and then it cuts back to her, and she's like, "What?" And she looks back, and it's not there again.
Yeah.
Like again, it was very reminiscent of like in The Strangers, where the guy like comes out of the background, and he's just standing there, and there's no music cue or anything. It's just super visually creepy.
Right.
And that moment was probably one of my favorite moments in the entire film.
It was really good because you and I both were like, like we're like, "Oh, okay,
this is starting."
There he is. Like nowadays, a movie like that, we'd get like a violin like cue real quick where they like hit a loud note real fast, and like she'd be like, "Oh."
Yeah.
And then it would be gone. It's just there. And if you aren't paying attention, and if you aren't like looking at the scene and not just looking where she would be looking, like you'll miss it. And that's what I love about those moments.
There's several other ones too, and then finally, like she's upstairs asleep with Samuel in the bed, and then she sees the Babadook come into the room.
Right, after it knocks on the door and then bangs on the door, which is his iconic stuff.
Right, and then the Babadook is like crawling along the ceiling, and all we're getting is like the claws, which is very like Edward Scissorhands. That's what I was thinking. Like, and cloak and top hat. and then it's just like this dark, shadowy figure. Now, there's like exactly 2 shots in this scene where we actually see the Babadook's face, and it's basically just a guy with white face paint and like black around the eyes. That doesn't look great.
No.
So the Babadook like jumps down at her and she like screams, and the way that the shot is edited, it almost looks like the Babadook goes inside of Amelia.
Right. It's not the will you let me in your house, because he's going to do that anyway. It's you have to let me in to you, and like it's going to be some puppet crap.
And at this point, things start getting even more and more crazy.
Yeah.
We kind of get into the later part of the movie where Samuel has kind of figured out that the Babadook has taken over his mother.
Right.
And he's very afraid of her. Amelia's kind of going crazy. She keeps trying to like watch TV and not fall asleep late at night.
Right.
And then Samuel and Max, the dog, are upstairs. Max runs downstairs where Amelia's watching TV, and Max is just barking and barking and barking and barking. And Amelia looks over, finally gets up, runs over, grabs the dog, and breaks his neck.
Right. And like
it's
we were
brutal.
Because you being an asshole.
Yeah.
Like in the beginning of the movie, you were like, "Oh, that dog's gonna die." I was like, "Don't you dare say that."
The very first time we see the dog, I looked at you and I was like, "That dog is dead. Like
Right.
that dog is not living through this movie."
But there's a really cool moment in this movie right before this where we kind of get this vibe that the emotions of our 2 characters have switched.
Yeah.
Where Sam, in the beginning of the movie, is always yelling, he's always shouting, he's obnoxious, he's horrible, but now he's like calm. Amelia, who was very calm and like centered in the beginning, is now really paranoid. She's like always checking behind her shoulders. There's cockroaches or something coming out of the wall.
Yeah, but it turns out they didn't really come out of the wall,
Right.
maybe.
And we get another scene where she crashes her car because the Babadook comes over the top of the... I don't know what that was about.
Yeah, it was very like T-1000. Like she sees the Babadook in the rear view mirror, and then she
Right.
hears the scratching of the claws, but we don't actually see the Babadook, but she and Sam both hear it.
Yeah.
A lot of like creepy suggestions, but nothing overtly stating this is what's going on.
Right. There's no like hit and like there he is. It's just like, and they do that a lot with this where Sam will see it.
Yeah.
And he'll freak out. Or and then eventually like they both see it and they both freak out. And that's really strong in this.
Yeah. She kills Max, the dog, and then Sam comes downstairs, sees, and kind of runs off. And then as Amelia starts to chase after him, there's a knock on the door, and it's Mrs. Roach at the door.
Yep.
And this was cool. Amelia opens up the door, but she doesn't open up the screen door, and her face is like still all in shadow, but you can see her eyes. And Mrs. Roach was basically just like, I just want to make sure everything is okay. You know, I really care about you and Sam. I love both of you. I care so much about you. And then it's a hard cut back to Amelia like going back into the kitchen, and I thought, well, Mrs. Roach is dead. Like
Right.
we didn't, it's off screen. We're going to get her body later on. Turns out Mrs. Roach lives. Yay.
Yeah, and we get this really weird shot before that where she's like watching TV and there's like a news program, which you made fun of it because like
Yes.
the news anchors are clearly like American.
Yeah, there's a news broadcast talking about how there was a woman who killed her son with a butcher knife.
Right, and he was found in the basement and blah, blah, blah.
And the narrator is American, so I thought it was like everybody in the movie is Australian. The movie takes place in Australia, but like the one thing that's about a woman murdering her son with a butcher knife was American.
It's international news.
I loved it. It was great. But there's a really cool shot within the news program on TV where in the background, in the window, we see Amelia's face.
With this like giant grin on it.
And it's very subtle. And then there's like a real big close-up.
Yeah, and we get like this weird like glass breaking sound.
Yeah, and this is where the movie like starts to kind of go into the cliche territory.
Yeah, it kind of... I don't want to say it gets dumber, but it stops doing its smart things.
Yeah.
And it starts to do, like you said, it starts to kind of follow tropes.
Yeah, the movie never fully crashes and burns, but it definitely dips in like the last 15 minutes of the movie.
It gets real close to crashing and burning though at one point.
Yeah, we're getting there. So she runs upstairs after Samuel, and Samuel is running away from her. They both end up back downstairs, and Amelia, calm, is like, Samuel, I'm sorry. You know what? Let's go over to Mrs. Roach's house. I just talked to her. Samuel's like, sorry, Mommy, and stabs her in the leg with a butcher knife.
Right.
And he's like, I know you're in there. I know that's the Babadook making you not love me, and runs. And she gets pissed and runs after him, and then a chase ensues.
He runs downstairs.
They end up in the basement.
And he goes Macaulay Culkin on her ass.
Yes. So earlier in the movie, and this is something we haven't mentioned, but like Samuel, in addition to being into magic, he's really into like, it's like very Goonies / Home Alone. He's into like making his own like little traps.
Right, like he builds like a crossbow at one point out of what looks like a ruler.
Yeah, like a ruler and like a dart, like a dartboard dart.
Right. And then he also has this like catapult backpack.
Yeah, and then
amazing.
He has like this trip line set up in the basement, and as Amelia runs down the stairs, he pulls this rope and she falls and smacks her head on like the basement floor.
Yeah.
And we were like, whoa.
Right,
and
she's done.
She passes out, and when she wakes up, Samuel has tied her
like
to
hardcore.
the floor. Yeah, it was awesome. And then he's like, I know the Babadook's in there. I know that this isn't really you, mommy. And she doesn't try to convince him. She just screams and yells and struggles. At this point, it's very like Exorcist. Like her body is like moving and contorting.
Yeah, and it has like a lot of like those like blur edits.
Like,
where,
like a motion blur. Yep.
Yeah.
And she breaks her arm free and tries to choke Samuel. And I think the idea was because he's like
full on chokes her.
Yeah,
right? She chokes him.
He's like, "No, mommy, no." And I think she has this moment of like where she lets him go, like she kind of takes back control.
Right. It's a callback. There's a moment in the beginning of the movie where when she puts on his gloves, that he rubs his glove against her face and she smiles.
Yes.
So like he does the same thing while she's choking him. He rubs his hand on her face, and like I guess that's what breaks it.
Yeah. And then so she leans over and then she vomits, and she vomits up like this black ooze.
Like this ink kind of crap.
Yeah, very much like ink.
For me, this is kind of where it kind of spirals a little.
If the movie would have ended here and kind of just been kind of subtle and not really explain anything, like, I don't know. But so at this point, they go back upstairs.
Right, because Sam is like, you haven't beat the Babadook. You know, we're thinking it's all over, but Sam yells, we haven't beat the Babadook yet, mommy. And like all of a sudden he's like drug upstairs into the second floor.
Yeah.
And like, so she runs up after him, and like he's being like thrown against the wall and everything. So she grabs him, and they go and they sit on the bed, and like the room very strangely like gets half dark.
Yes.
And she's like yelling at it and like, what do you want? What do you want from us? The bed's shaking, and then it stops, and her husband walks out, and he's like kind of just talking about stuff, and he's like saying the things that he said before he dies.
Yes.
In the car.
Yeah, he's talking about, don't worry, just keep breathing. Right. It's starting to rain, and then
we hear like the car, and we see like headlights on his face, and then like his head just gets like sliced in half.
Yes.
And he like falls to the ground, and then he's like drugged back into the darkness. And then we get this. It's like the pop-up book has the picture of it. We get what looks like wings.
Yeah, it's like the cloak. It's like Batman style. Like the cloak is like opened.
Right,
and it's like in the shape
out.
of wings. Yeah.
So
like Manos, hands of fate.
Right.
I am Torgo. I take care of the place while the master is away.
The master? Bobby Fischer?
So they have a yelling war back and forth, and she's, get the fuck out of my house, you trespasser, and he's like, rah, and that's all he says. But then he falls on the floor. Like this part was really weird.
So I think the idea is that she. So again, okay. So
right.
The idea of this the idea of this movie is, again, we don't know if it's all in Amelia's head or if this is really happening. So I think what is going on, they're up in the bedroom, and Amelia's husband comes out and is talking to her because she freaks out when that happens, and his head gets cut in half.
Right, and
she drops to the ground. She's like yelling and screaming, and has her hands on her head.
Right, like, why are you doing this?
Why are you doing this? And then she gets up and she recovers, and then she yells the Babadook, "This is my house, you're trespassing, like get the fuck out of my house." Right. And then the Babadook like falls to the ground, and then it's just clothing.
Right.
That's
and
it.
This is the second time that he's done that. There's an earlier scene where he takes the form of her husband, and like they're talking back and forth, and it kind of like he doesn't repeat things, it just kind of sounds like they're talking, but then it's clearly the Babadook because he says, bring me the boy and everything will be fine.
Yeah. And then it's this really creepy like, bring me the boy.
Right. It's really like that was really
good. Effective, yeah.
Like I loved that.
So I think the idea here is that, she vomits up the black ooze, and we're supposed to think, oh, okay, like that's it. And
she's
then
overcome it.
She's overcome it, whether it's her mental faculties or whether it's an actual creature or demon or whatever. like she has won the day. And when Samuel gets dragged upstairs again, and then the Babadook comes out as her late husband, I interpret that as this is like the Babadook or her mental problems. This is their last hurrah of like, your husband dying was the most traumatic thing that has happened to you.
Right.
So if anything is going to bring you down, it's this.
It's going to be seeing it again.
Yeah, seeing him die again. And she freaks out, but then she kind of rises to the occasion. And that's when the Babadook like drops to the ground and is just clothing.
Right.
And again, I read that as it's her final confrontation. She is able to overcome the thing that was most traumatic to her.
Right, because it's whether or not the monster is a monster or if the monster is grief.
Right.
And like grieving.
Yeah, and depression and the mental anxiety.
Right.
And you and I think both agree that if the movie ended right here, or if this was like the wrap up.
This is the end of the Babadook part.
Then this would be pretty much a great movie.
I would even say maybe in the basement.
And I don't disagree. I think the stuff in the upper room, like, it still works. It's a little more over the top in the rest of the movie.
It goes a little poltergeist for me right there at the end with everything shaking and the walls cracking.
It does. But I think if that was the final confrontational scene, that it would have worked.
Okay.
Because it would have crescendoed at that point, and then we would have gone down, and it kind of would have made sense just because it was the climactic moment.
Right.
But then when Amelia goes over, she touches the hat, and like Samuel is like yelling at her not to do that, and then the camera goes into first person of the Babadook spirit.
Right, which it kind of does that throughout the movie, but never like this drastically.
Yeah, it did it a couple times, and honestly, it felt awkward in those other couple times, but they were very minor. This is like full on like final shot of Evil Dead.
Right.
Where the camera like zooms through the house and back into the basement, and then like the basement door slams shut.
Right. So she runs downstairs and locks it.
She runs downstairs, locks the door, and we were like, okay.
Right, so it's downstairs now.
Right. And then so we start to get the epilogue where everything's kind of back to normal.
Right.
Amelia is shown to kind of support Samuel and his like weird inventions and stuff.
Right.
They're outside doing gardening. Like everything's kind of back to normal.
It does kind of have a funny shot where it pans up to them gardening, and while it's panning up,
yes.
we get the corpse of the dog.
The dog is buried underground. That was morbidly humorous.
Right.
Yes.
It was kind of like, oh, there's the dog. Great.
The social workers come back and they're like, hey, great news. We placed Sam in a new school, and it looks like everything's going really well. And hey, you're going to celebrate your birthday. And he's like, yeah, this will be the first time we celebrate on the day. You know, my dad died on the same day as my birthday. And Amelia's okay with it. And she's like his father, he just says what's on his mind. And it's like, okay, everything kind of back to normal. While they're out gardening, they're also like picking up earthworms and putting it into like a little tray. And then we go inside, and Amelia is with Samuel, and she's like, you need to go outside for a few minutes.
Right, and he's like, when can I see it? And she's like, when you're older, you'll see it.
Yeah. Then she goes down into the basement and puts the tray of worms on the ground, and then we hear the noises again from the Babadook.
And then it Evil Dead's again, where it comes on top of her and like does like a back bend.
Yeah, it's like, again, it's kind of like Exorcist, like her back like contorts backwards, and she's like scared and screaming, and the camera's in first person.
Right, and then she just starts going, no, shush, 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 and like she shushes it.
Yeah.
Like it calms down.
And then she turns back upright, and then the tray of worms just sucked into the darkness, and she kind of smiles and then walks back upstairs again.
Right.
And at this point, we were like, so is the Babadook still alive in the basement? So, and again, we were talking about this. So my interpretation is this is Samuel's birthday. It's also the same day that her husband died. So if we're going with a theory that everything was just kind of in her head and it's her overcoming her issues,
right.
This is symbolizing, hey, even though that she overcame it, her husband still died on this day.
The day, yeah.
And she still has to deal with that, but she's strong enough to not let it overwhelm her.
Right.
But if that's the way you were going for it, like the movie up until this point has been so subtle with almost everything, and it's worked out so well. And here it's so overtly over the top.
Right.
That I think it really kind of blemishes the quality and the ending of this movie.
And I think if they wanted to do it like a final scene where she goes down and does something with it, like don't have her feed it, maybe just have her go down there and like
confront
talk
it.
To it
yeah,
or something.
That's what I was thinking.
Because then you could have the idea that the basement is maybe her emotions or her mind.
Yeah.
And like on this day, you know, it's a depressing day. She's going to be reminded of this. And her going downstairs is a physical representation of her shutting that emotion down and going, it sucks, but it's my son's birthday and I'm going to focus on that. We're going to get over it and we're going to go and we're going to enjoy Sam's birthday. I think that would have been stronger.
I agree.
Like, just confront it. Don't feed it worms. Like, I joked about that. I was like, were they going to feed him the worms? And then they did. And I also joked earlier that I was like, what, are we going to talk to the monster? But then she does. So I think it's just, it's a really sloppy ending, which is kind of a trope for horror films, I think. But...
Right. And it's certainly not the worst ending I've ever seen in a horror movie, but it was a little disappointing just because the rest of the film was so strong.
Yeah.
And the ending just kind of drops the ball. It doesn't completely crash and burn, but like I was talking, if we had ended on that climactic moment in the room, that would have been a really nice way to like, okay, now we bring the movie down, we slide into the ending. Whereas this, you know, the whole movie is great and the ending is just kind of so, and it just kind of leaves you with this like meh feeling as you leave. Like great movies, generally the ones that you remember the best, they're either good throughout or they have really solid endings, even if they don't have solid beginnings, because that's the thing that's going to stay with you when you walk away.
Right. And we even get a lot of like really good scenes that parallel the idea of her fighting this grief. She's constantly tormented by it at night. There's even a moment where she's in her room and its hat falls down like a chimney or something.
Yeah.
And like she's like crawling across the floor trying to get away from it as it's like yelling its name at her. That's really good because like that's her literally physically fighting her grief. And it's really interesting. There is a very weird Shining line in this movie. It's not directly from it, but it's incredibly parallel to it. It's the moment where Jack Nicholson is, like, he's finally snapped, and Shelley Duvall is full on aware of it. And he's, like, coming up the stairs at her, and she's got the bat.
Wendy, stay away! Darling, light of my life. I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm gonna bash them right the fuck in.
And, like, she literally almost verbatim says, one of these days, I just want to bash your head in and, like, have it leak all over it. It's like...
It's very indicative.
Yeah, someone clearly liked that movie a lot. All we needed was the weird bear blowjob scene, and it would have been 100%.
That is really weird.
And it makes no sense, and it shows up, and it's
such
gone.
A weird moment in that movie.
Because it's just, she just walks upstairs, and it's like, he just pulls his head back, and it's like, what?
It's a dude in a bear costume giving an old man a blowy. That's a thing that happens.
What? Like, are the ghosts?
Thank you, Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, good job.
Maybe it was a forewarning to, like, Eyes Wide Shut.
Right. It's coming, guys. Don't worry. It's him appeasing the Illuminati? Isn't that the big theory behind that movie?
Vaguely. Let's go with that.
Yeah, let's not get into that.
So, that's the Babadook.
Yeah. I liked it. I
liked it too.
surprised.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend watching it.
It's funny though. I don't know if it's horror as much as it's a thriller.
Well, it's definitely it's more creepy than it is scary, and it's not a traditional, like, it's definitely not a slasher movie.
Right.
You know, it's more in line. So, and we're
not. The body count is one dog.
This reminds me a lot of probably my favorite horror movie. It's called The House of the Devil. And it was made, I want to say it was like 2008, 2009, but it was made, and when you watch it, it feels like it was made in like the late 70s.
Right.
Like very much how Stranger Things, when you watch that television show, like even down to the title sequence, it very much is evoking that spirit of the early 80s.
Right, or like It Follows even kind of tries to do that with like scratchy radio sounds throughout it.
And House of the Devil, which I super highly recommend if you haven't seen it, does the same thing. Like it looks like it was a movie made in the late 70s, but it's a slow burn, and it's more creepy, and it's a lot of building of tension, and that's the same way that the Babadook was. So it reminded me a lot of that, and that's a movie that I really like, and that has a super strong ending. So again, side note, see The House of the Devil because it's awesome. But yeah, I would recommend the Babadook. Like I had a really good time watching it. It's very well filmed, which I appreciate.
Yeah, like I even said that in the beginning where I was like, wow, I feel like I'm watching a movie. Because most horror films, they're very bland when it comes to how they're shot.
They're very, like, you know, kind of copy-paste. Like they all...
Shot, reverse shot, or wide shot. Like that's your choices.
They don't really have their own unique style. Like this movie was dripping with tone and style. Just the way the movie was presented and edited and mixed with sound and the acting and the direction. Like the kid was great, Samuel.
Yeah.
Like he was fantastic.
Like he perfectly embodied a 6-year-old kid who is a little, hyperactive.
Yeah, and weird. Yeah.
And probably has ADHD. I think that, like, they never talk about it, but probably what he's got, guys.
Almost certainly. So yeah, just a very, very well-made movie. It doesn't have the strongest ending, but it's worth going through the journey.
Right, I'd agree. So, his appearance.
Yes.
The reason why I think he looks like that. Throughout the movie, while she's watching TV, she's watching a ton of, like, 1930s, 1940s black and white horror films. Very bad idea, since you feel like you're being haunted by something. He appears to look a lot like Lon Chaney from Phantom of the Opera, even.
Yes.
So I think that's why he looks like that. I think he's shown kind of weirdly in the book, but it's not like a realistic drawing. It's like a pencil set. I think that's why he shows up like that. It's her manifestation of what he would look like.
There's shots where she's like watching television and the Babadook like appears in the movie or appears in the background.
Which was fantastic.
Yeah, that was all really good. I just think specifically those two shots in the room where we see his face like in quote reality, like those looked a little rough.
It was a little break, yeah.
And like, because every other shot in the movie where we see the Babadook standing in the room, it's always like cast in shadow.
Right, or we just see the cloak and the hands.
And that was really effective. And again, it didn't ruin the movie by any means, but I just felt like those two specific shots, I was like, you could have just put his face in shadow again. It probably would have been a little bit better.
So, although there's not jump scares in this film, I will say I was a little irritated and a little let down by the amount of, like, screaming they do to cause horror and tension. So there's a couple moments when she gets a phone call and he's on the phone, which I thought was weird. I think the only time that it's, like, really effective is when she sees it coming into the room and she covers her face with the blanket and, like, it clearly gets, like right in front of her face. I almost said right here, and I'm showing the audience with my hand where it's at.
Yeah, podcasting, a visual medium.
Right. He, like, gets, like, right there, and he just yells, like, Babadook, and, like, just keeps yelling it. That was cool, but when they kept doing it, and when he just started just to randomly scream, I was like, it was a little much at times.
I can see where you're coming from.
Because my biggest thing with horror movies is that a lot of the things they do is not scary, it's startling.
Yeah.
And that's what a loud thing is. Like, if you go downstairs and some dude just starts playing a drum set loudly, you'll wince, or you'll kind of have like a little jump or something. It's not because you're scared of the drum set, it's because it's startling, because it's loud.
Yeah.
That's kind of something I wish it would have avoided.
I agree. There's definitely a big difference between startling, scary, and creepy. And I think the reason that we're pointing these things out is because most of this movie was so good that we are kind of nitpicking at a few things that were, the cliches and the tropes that it falls into. Yeah, it's a horror movie. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, it's doing those things. Yeah,
because it's got to bring that crowd in, and it's not going to bring that crowd in unless he screams like a pterodactyl. That's got to do it. Also, Samuel wets himself. That was a great moment, too.
And she's like, you're 6 years old and you're still wetting yourself, while the Babadook's still inside of her.
It was very Otacon-esque. That's what this is. This is a prequel to Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, definitely.
So, tell me about Metal Gear. You knew? The game is fucking called Metal Gear Solid.
So that was the Babadook. We really enjoyed watching it, and we recommend that you do the same.
Absolutely. It is on Netflix, which we're not sponsored by yet. We'll just insert Netflix.
Come on,
ad
Netflix.
Right here.
Yeah, just
pick us up, guys.
Yeah, you want to. If you'd like to let us know what you thought of the Babadook or any of the other movies that we've talked about this month, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at POP RANT RADIO. As always, if you're listening to us on iTunes, please rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps out the show.
Yep.
Thank you to Major, as always, for the theme songs.
Thank you, sir.
We appreciate it. And other than that, we will see you next week, returning to normal.
Right. And to all our Australian fans, what is Wally's? Is that McDonald's?
She was like, we can go to Wally's and you can eat whatever you want.
I feel like I'm left out, guys. So, on top of, rating, subscribing, all that stuff, send us back to Wally's. I imagine it'll still be fresh when it gets here.
No cockroaches, please.
Right. We also don't have an address up, so just send it somewhere with the title of the podcast. We'll know where it goes.
We'll get it. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
All right, guys. Bye.